Hello, good morning and a warm welcome. Rose Jacobs for Kalkine TV, reporting to you live from Sydney, and you're watching the Global Markets Roundup. Let's dive into some key highlights and happenings from yesterday. Starting with the US market, global stock benchmarks and oil prices fell sharply Tuesday after drug maker Moderna warned existing vaccines are unlikely to be as effective against the new coronavirus variant, which spurred investors to pile into safe haven assets such as government bonds and the yen. MSCI's gauge of stocks across the globe shed 1.20% following broad declines in Europe and Asia. US stocks slid on Tuesday, November 30th, recording one of their worst performances in recent days as concerns over the new COVID-19 variant Omicron weighed on investors' minds. The S&P 500 was down 1.90%, the Dow Jones declined 1.86%, the Nasdaq Composite fell 1.55%, and the small cap Russell 2000 fell 1.79%. Markets took cues from the falling global oil prices and Moderna CEO Stéphane Bancelon's comments on Tuesday that the existing vaccines may be less effective against the new variant. Traders pulled back from stocks after Fed Chair Jerome Powell said that inflation might rise further and it should not be considered transitory. He proposed wrapping up the tapering process earlier than expected. The central bank is likely to go for a rate hike rise after the process culminates. Meanwhile, the supply chain woes were expected to continue with the emergence of Omicron, which might also force a fresh round of travel restrictions in the coming days. Utilities and consumer staple stocks were the top movers on the S&P 500 index on Tuesday. Communication, basic materials and energy segments were the bottom movers. All of the 11 stock segments of the index closed in the red. And now it's time for a very small break, but stay tuned as I'll be back with UK and Australian market updates.
Property by Kalkine. Looking for a dream home? Well, that may sound easy, but it isn't. And from looking for a property that is the right fit for you in terms of cost and other factors, to zeroing down on the right mortgage plan, there are various aspects to consider. And for the latest slowdown in the property market, tune in on Kalkine TV with me, Sage. I will give the latest updates on the property market as well as real estate stocks to help you make the right decision. Keep watching Property with Kalkine.
Welcome back, I'm Rose Jacobs and you are watching the Global Markets Roundup show. European stocks fell on Tuesday after US Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell warned US inflation may not be transitory and as worries about the efficacy of existing vaccines against the Omicron COVID-19 variant weighed on investors. The Pan-European Stocks 600 closed down 0.9% after having fallen up to 1.6% during the session to 7-week lows. After staging a sharp recovery from the intraday bottom, the domestic benchmark FTSE 100 ended 50 points lower from the previous close. The market index touched an intraday low of 6,989.66 on Tuesday, the lowest level in the last 2 months. Earlier on October the 1st, 2021, the index made a low of 6,989.64. During the session, the FTSE 100 gained 106 points or 1.51% from the morning low of 6,998.73 before terminating 50.50 points or 0.71%. Meanwhile, the mid-cap reflector FTSE 250 dropped 236.61 points or 1.04% after hitting an intraday bottom of 22,453.56. The top 3 shares by market capitalisation on the FTSE 100 shed 0.60% to 1.6%, with the stock of AstraZeneca and Unilever providing the major negative points to the index. Japanese shares dropped for the third straight session on Tuesday after Moderna's chief executive officer told the Financial Times that existing COVID-19 vaccines would likely be much less effective at tackling Omicron than earlier variants. The Nikkei average lost 1.63%, hitting its lowest level since October 7 and erasing earlier gains fuelled by hopes that Omicron's impact might not be as severe as feared. It has lost 5.7% in the past 3 sessions. China's blue chips closed lower on Tuesday after US drug maker Moderna set off fresh alarm bells about the Omicron variant, while data showed Chinese services sector grew at a slightly slower pace amid regional outbreaks of COVID-19 cases. The blue chip CSI 300 index closed 0.4% lower, while the Shanghai Composite Index was flat at 3,563.89 points. South Korean shares closed at their lowest level in 11 months on Tuesday, as warnings by Moderna Inc. chief on Omicron coronavirus variant spooked investors and fueled a broad sell-off. The Kospi ended down 2.42%, its lowest close since December 29, 2020. The index extended losses to a 6th session. Moving to the Australian market, the ASX 200 rose 0.22% on Tuesday. Looking at the commodity market now, starting with bond yields. 2-year yields for US stood at 0.53%, while for Australia it stood at 0.59%. 5-year yield for US stood at 1.15%, while for Australia it stood at 1.28%. 10-year yield for US stood at 1.44%, while for Australia it stood at 1.68%. The dollar index turned positive after the Powell comments and was last up 0.1% at 96.331. Concerns about the efficacy of current vaccines on the Omicron variant spooked oil miners. Brent crude futures fell 4% to $70.49 a barrel by 12:12 p.m. West Texas Intermediate, or WTI, crude futures fell 6.2% to US $65.65 a barrel. Gold beat a hasty retreat on Tuesday as investors latched on to seemingly hawkish remarks from the US Federal Reserve Chair. Spot gold fell 0.7%, while US gold futures settled down 0.5%. Meanwhile, the most traded iron ore contract on the Dalian Commodity Exchange for January delivery ended 2.4% higher. Well, that's all for now, but keep watching Kalkine TV for more market updates.